Thank you so much, Yuan, and good morning to you and good morning to everybody else. Yeah, so thank you for this opportunity that that we've been given by TUT and by Share Screen to share some stuff with you this morning. So you will see that my presentation, like Yuan said, is really about the stuff that you will be dealing with on a daily basis. You know, sort of if you are a conservationist, or if you if you are going to be running some of these parks maybe in future. I know that you guys are all second year TUT students, so this is obviously what you want to do, where you want to get to in your life, and so we'll look at a couple of things this morning. So as you can see there, observing, reacting, and dealing with poaching incidents. Okay, so we're dealing with those three themes this morning. How do you actually observe and monitor your protected area well? How do you react in when there's a possible incursion, and then dealing with whether there's a, when there's a possible poaching incident. So maybe just a little bit of background about myself for a minute or two. For those of you who don't know me, I'm also a TUT alumni and alma mater. That's, I used to study at the Technikon Pretoria in the mid-1990s. Got my diploma in 1997. Joined the then Natal Parks Board as a ranger in 1996 and have been employed by the same organization since then. So got a couple of years in the field. I'm presently stationed at a place called Weenen Nature Reserve in the Midlands of KZN, and then spent some time in the Drakensberg, which is a wonderful part of the world, not far away from where I am now. Spent some time in Zululand as well, on the Zululand parks. Short stint on the coast, and like I say, have landed up here in the Midlands of KZN, managing Weenen Nature Reserve. Yeah, okay, so that's where it is. Weenen, smallish reserve in the Midlands of KZN, in the Tugela Basin. It's about 5,000 hectares in total. Sustains a population of white and black rhinoceros, so quite an important little reserve from that point of view. It runs a very good rate of a birth rate for both black and white rhinoceros, and I often seed a whole lot of other places with the black rhino that we breed here, and we also supply a lot of black rhino to the Black Rhino Range expansion program. So quite an important little reserve from that point of view, but of course a reserve then that has also been hammered and also been unfortunately targeted quite a lot in recent years, the last decade or so, from a rhino poaching point of view. I don't think we need to go into any of the rhino poaching stuff. I'm sure that you guys are well aware what we're dealing with in South Africa at present, and it's quite a scourge of poaching that's hit us in our country. So, and even Weenen Nature Reserve, where I am based, has not been unfortunately left out. We've also had to deal with poaching. Very many animals, unfortunately, having been killed in this park in the last decade or so. All right, so yeah, just a little bit of background on that. That's just the reserve, basically. A couple of tourist roads, but mostly it's area just set aside for the breeding of game and the breeding of rhino. Okay, guys, so look, like I said in the beginning, we'll be dealing with three main themes today. The first theme being observing and patrolling of a protected area and doing this effectively. The second theme that will go into that would be then the incursions, trying to pick up incursions into protected areas, and then if that incursion then leads to a poaching incident, how you would actually deal with that poaching incident. So when it comes to observing and patrolling of a protected area, this is something that you will be doing a lot of in your life if you run a protected area, and if you are if you are going to be stationed on a protected area, you'll do quite a lot of that. So yeah, so just to get into the nitty-gritty of it, obviously the only way that you can find out if there's anything happening on your protected area or anything going wrong on your protected area is by actually being there and and being in the field and observing your area, and obviously making sure that you pick up anything untoward that happens. And the only way that you can do that is obviously through patrolling. Okay, so there's a lot of other things that you can actually bring in, like technology-wise, which we won't get into too much detail about today, remote sensing kind of patrols, etc. But this is really dealing with boots on the ground, men and women that are in the field and observing the protected area by patrolling it. All right. Okay, so I think the first thing that we got to just think of before we get into the patrolling side of stuff is a crime. What is a crime? I mean, we've spoken, a lot of the other speakers you would remember have spoken a lot about criminal activities on protected areas. So a crime, as you know, there needs to be something in our law in South Africa that actually is not permitted, and then that should be written down in a statute or in a law of the country. So all of conservation legislation, all of conservation laws are all written into statutes. In other words, we can't just say because we don't like somebody walking past our entrance gate on a road that we are now deeming this to be illegal and it's a crime, and therefore we will now deal with a person if they do that. So there's got to be a crime, there's got to be a statute that actually supports that crime, or a law. So things have got to be written into laws. Obviously there are common law offenses that also will come into a protected area, things like theft. And in general, these things aren't written down in any statutes in South Africa. As you know, the common law is just a law that humanity lives by. But definitely all of the other things, is written down in statutes. So this is a crime. So there's got to be a crime for you in order to be able to arrest somebody and take away their right of movement and their right of freedom of speech, etc., etc. Okay, so when we look at a wildlife setting, there's different types of crimes that you will deal with. Obviously, we all know the common ones, things like poaching. But there's also more uncommon things, that you would deal with in your daily work. Things like trespassing onto your property. There would be things like stealing of natural resources, like maybe plant material. Things like stealing of firewood. There could be intimidation of your staff. There could be, things like grievous bodily harm. There's all kinds of different crimes that you will deal with in a wildlife setting. But the problem is that you would not know that these things are going on if you don't detect it in time. And the only way that you can ensure that you know if there are crimes being committed on your property and on your reserve is by field patrolling and observing that reserve very strongly. So let's get into that. You will see that patrolling and detection, is something. If you can look at this guy on the side here on this photograph, patrolling could have implication for many things. It could be a law enforcement or a crime detection exercise, but it could also be for biological monitoring. You can do infrastructure inspections, so if you want to go and look at a far-flung fence or a windmill or something to that effect, you can also, that could also be a patrol at the end of the day. You can gather intelligence, if you want to go and visit a certain area, maybe mingle with the people on the outside of your reserve, to try to get some kind of intelligence. There's visible policing as well, which is another really good reason to do patrolling. In other words, if like me, for instance, you've got a very busy road that goes right through your park, or you've got a busy sort of town, maybe right next to your reserve. You can put people there that are in uniform, fully dressed, fully armed, and just make that a visible policing thing. So there's different reasons why one patrols, but you'll always, when you patrol, you would have some kind of a reason for doing that. Okay, so you're not just going to patrol because you want to waste time or because you want to spend some time out in the field. There's got to be reasoning for that, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Okay, so different types of patrols, guys, and I've got to just make sure that you understand. I work for Ezemvelo, KZN Wildlife, so we have a certain way that we do things. It's not to say that it's going to be the same for every other protected area. It's not to say that it's going to be the same for any other organization. So sandparks might have different types of patrols. They may even do it in a different manner. But for Ezembelo, basically we have a certain type of different types of patrols that we make use of most often. Now you also, as you can see on the two smaller bullets there, you also have to then differentiate that between small and medium protected areas and large protected areas or extensive wildlife areas. So you would understand that a small or medium protected area, because of the fact that simply it's a small protected area, is going to have different types of patrols, a different manner of patrol, and a whole host of different things from a large or extensive wildlife area. So in other words, to give you an example, patrolling here in Weenen Nature Reserve at 5,000 hectares is possibly not going to be the same as doing patrols in the Kruger National Park. So you would understand, that there would be different types, and they will probably be approached in different manners, etc. Right. So just a little bit of the different types of patrols, guys. And again, these are very, very basic categories. You can go into a lot of detail about each and every one of those categories, but just to give you the sort of basis of it. Obviously, anti-poaching patrols. These are important patrols that you'll be using at on a very a daily basis. If you run a reserve with, especially with important animals like elephant and rhino, you'll be doing a lot of anti-poaching patrols. Biological patrols, obviously, when you're doing biological monitoring of animals or plants, in KZN, obviously, because we have a large population of rhino, we spend a lot of our time on biological patrols, specifically monitoring rhinoceros. So there will be specific way and a specific outcome and reason for that kind of patrol. Boundary patrols, you will know that your boundary of your protected area is basically your last, your last sort of the end of your protected area and the start of humanity. So you would need to know that this is intact, especially if you have a small protected area where animals and plants are closed into a small area. It is incredibly important that your boundary stays intact and that your boundaries, the integrity of your boundary is intact. So boundary patrols, in other words, fence patrols, checking a boundary could also not be anything else. It doesn't have to be a fence. It could be something like a river. It could be something like maybe a road or a mountain range or the edge of a cliff or something like that. But certainly your boundary patrols are important. Reconnaissance patrols, this is a thing that we specifically use in areas that are new, maybe new ground that we're breaking, finding out what's going on in that area. Places like in the Drakensberg Park where you could go and walk for a week without ever seeing the same place twice. We'll go and do reconnaissance patrols in those areas. These are very often longer patrols as well, maybe mounted sometimes, in other words, on a horse, sometimes maybe on foot as an extended patrol, but reconnaissance patrols. Maybe if you want to see a new boundary or a new part of your park, and you also want to know who's actually on the border of that boundary, you'll do a reconnaissance patrol plus a boundary patrol thrown in at the same time. Infrastructural inspections, very important, because as the manager of a reserve, you will be ultimately responsible for the infrastructure on your reserve and for all of the stuff that actually fall under you as that manager. So if you have water holes, dams, maybe boreholes, things like that, maybe if you've got, like I say, fences, roads in far-flung areas, you've got radio repeaters that you've got to look at, maybe things like airstrips that need to be graded, etc. So all of those things, will be forming part of your inspections. So even if, like, I will go often and I'll go and have a look at my dams and my watering holes, because this is a very dry area of Natal, I would go and have a look at my watering holes to see what the state is of the drinking water. I'll use an infrastructural inspection patrol for that kind of thing. So just a little bit of background regarding the different types of patrols. Like I say, guys, there's lots of other ones, and lots of other people will have other ideas about these things. But we can, maybe in the Q&A, we can get into a bit more detail regarding that. Okay, so one of the most important things that you will ever do when you patrol your protected area is that you'll plan those patrols. Okay, so you must understand that this is extremely important. A patrol cannot just be a haphazard walk out in the veld, or just piling into a bakkie and driving down the road for no reason at all. Patrols have to be planned. They have to be planned well, and they have to be planned in advance, and they've got to include 3 different levels of planning. So there's the pre-patrol planning, there's what will happen during the patrol, and then there's the post-patrol planning. In other words, how would you debrief and how would you follow up, etc., etc. So these 3 things are extremely important. So I'll spend just a minute on these. If, for instance, your pre-planning of your patrol is not done well, you can understand that your patrol leader and your stick will not know what it is that they need to actually go and achieve. And then when you don't do any patrolling during the patrol, the guys will just be walking around in the veld, and they'll probably actually not achieve anything. And then you will find a lot of stuff whilst on patrol. You may find spoor, you may find a snare line, etc., etc. And at the end of that patrol, you would need to then have a debrief as the patrol leader or as the supervisor of the patrol leader with the patrol leader and the stick to find out how you can actually follow up what you found and how do you need to deal with what is happening in certain places. So you have to do the patrol planning. Now, who normally does patrol planning? Well, the stick leader will do that. And if the stick leader is a lance corporal or a corporal, that's fine. If the stick leader is a section ranger or an officer in charge like me, that's fine as well. But at the end of the day, the planning has to be done. So in my case, for instance, I will do the big planning for the patrols for the month, and I will hand this over to the guy who's underneath me, who's a corporal or a principal field ranger, and then he will take those plans and then he'll translate them into daily patrol planning exercises. All right. Your planning of your patrol has to include all the details. And this is details around your equipment and firearms. Okay. So in other words, a person walking out into the veld with slip-slops on and a cell phone, except and not a firearm and a battle jacket, etc., is not properly equipped for that patrol. Sometimes if you're going to be doing a reef patrol, you must understand that you're going to need your aqua lungs and your dive suit, etc. So your equipment and your firearms, and it must be workable and checked before you go on that patrol. You've also got to plan around your members and rations. In other words, who's going to be on the patrol? Are we going to go away for a long enough period to take rations with? What are those rations going to look like? Is it normal? Is it necessary for us to take more water, etc.? Maps and patrol orders. Obviously, you need maps when you go out into an extensive wildlife area, whether it's on a telephone or a laptop on your hand, or whether it's in a paper map. It's up to you. Patrol orders. Remember, the patrol orders will have to be issued to the patrol leader. The members of the stick will only find out what those patrol orders are on the patrol itself. This just makes it easier, cleaner, and it also looks after the patrol and the integrity of that patrol. You got to look at things like entry and extraction points. Where are the guys going to be entering? Where you're going to be putting them out, especially if you're doing long distance patrols. And maybe if you got to go collect people with vehicles or with even with aircraft. Radio procedures and first aid. You got to know that you have your radio procedures in place. You got your codes, etc., etc., and there has to be obviously first aiders on each of those patrols. So a couple of quick principles of good patrol planning is flexibility and robustness, but also a clear patrol purpose. So it may sound 2 different poles, but at the end of the day, you have to be flexible and robust when you do your patrol. If you are on a patrol and you really sometimes, and you see that you got to be diverted somewhere else for something else, you got to be flexible to do that. But at the same time, there has to be a clear purpose for that patrol. So the guys that are going on the patrol needs to know what it is that they're going to achieve. Let me tell you guys one thing today, after having worked for so many years in this kind of environment. Patrol sticks that go out without any purpose every single day start losing concentration and people get hurt. So at the end of the day, the guys must know this month we're going to be looking for black rhino 1, 2, and 3, or we're going to be mapping fires in this area, or we're going to be lying ambush in that area. So they need to know what is going to be the purpose of their patrols. But at the same time, there's got to be secrecy as well. Okay, you would understand that you can't just share your patrols and your patrol purpose with everybody. So therefore, your stick leaders and their supervisors will always keep that stuff close to heart. Patrols have got to be random. In other words, at the end of the day, you can't leave the patrol camp, the picket camp, in the same direction every single day at the same time, going to the same part of the park or another part of the park. On a Tuesday there and a Wednesday there, and then next week Tuesday same and Wednesday same. Can't work like that. You would understand that it's got to be random time-wise. It's got to be random in space as well. And there's got to be an outcome, guys. You have to have an outcome. You've got to know what it is that you want to achieve on that patrol, or that range of patrols for that week or that month or so. All right, couple of principles. Execution of a patrol, you have to understand what is optimal duration and optimal distance. Okay, I can tell you guys now, in the eastern seaboard, low-veld areas of South Africa, where it's hot in summer, in January and February, if a field ranger patrols more than 5 hours on a march in hilly country, he starts losing concentration. So then people get hurt. So you got to understand where you are, what the terrain looks like, what the area is like, what the threat level is like, and then what the weather is like, etc., and work out for your protected area what is your optimal duration and distance. You can understand that in the Kruger National Park, where areas are flat like a table, you will definitely be able to cover a far longer distance than you'll be able to cover in the Drakensberg Park, where you'll have to climb a kilometer vertically up, in the first 2 hours of your patrol, kind of thing. So you would understand that you need to know where you are and what is the unique situation of your protected area. Okay, sorry. There must be a mission accomplishment. Okay, so in other words, at the end of the day, once that patrol is executed, you must have accomplished your mission. So in other words, we were set out to do this. Have we achieved that? If not, why not? And how can we make sure that we do it in the next time? If we have accomplished it, great. So we know we can then report back to the supervisor and tell him that we have seen that specific fence. We know that there's no problems there, etc. Record keeping, right? We'll just mention at the end as well, the pocket book, the good old South African pocket book that you use. We have all kinds of devices as the youngsters today where you can write things into computers. Guys and girls, trust me, learn how to use a pocketbook properly. You can take a pocketbook to court and you can use it as evidence in a court of law. It's just a little thing that you put in your pocket, but there's a very specific way of actually filling it in and writing it. Right. Debrief and follow up. It's self-explanatory. At the end of the patrol leader has to debrief the stick, and we must see, okay, we saw a dead animal in a certain part of the world. We needed to go and fetch that skull. So let's take a vehicle and we follow up on that. Most important thing about patrols, safe return. If you do not return safely, then unfortunately, then you haven't had a good patrol. All right, guys, so let's move on to the next section, reacting to illegal incursion. Okay, so now you've done the patrolling, you've observed your protected area, you've come across a place where you think that there's an incursion that's actually happened in your park. So how do you react to an incursion in a protected area? Well, you get there, you try to see and you try to intervene. Okay, but the principle here really is it must be the most effective reaction forward. But really what it means is that if you go and you react to an incursion, you got to do so with speed, focus, and proportionality. But that means that at the end of the day, you have to have the highest probability of success. In other words, if you don't, then at the end of the day, you're going to be wasting resources and you are going to be wasting time. Okay. So, and this is where something called incident command comes in very importantly. So when you have an incident or an incursion, there has to be a commander that at the end of the day is going to say to you where to go, how to get there, and what to do once you're there. All right. So most effective reaction with the highest probability of success. All right, so your reactionary protocol is also always going to be tiered or stepped. Okay, in other words, when I say the right level of reaction for the incursion, if there's an old lady, you get a report of an old lady inside the protected area that are gathering firewood, and she is over 70 years old, and you go there with 10 field rangers all armed with automatic rifles, it is unproportional reaction. You can understand that this is not necessary. At the end of the day, you need to be proportionate in your reaction to this kind of thing. And then, so it's got to be, it's got to be tiered or stepped. Okay, the deployment of your resources is important. So you got to manage your deployment of your resources very, very well. And then backup and assistance, absolutely important. So when you react to an incursion, there has to be somebody that stays behind on backup at the end of the day. Tracking and hot pursuit, we'll get into tracking and hot pursuit because it's an important part of actually managing a poaching incident. Remember always that you have to look elsewhere at all times. So you can't just be focused in one area at all times and then you're not looking in other areas, because very often all of your resources will be in one part of the park and the guys will come in on the other side. And I put down the incident command again. It's an important part of it. All right, so resource deployment, very easy. What is needed? What do you have? Where does it have to go to? And is it proportional? Okay, so at the end of the day, what is needed? So you know that you need a certain amount of resources to be able to react to this kind of incursion. If you have those things, fine, then you can make use of them. Where do you have to go to, and is it proportional? Remember, we spoke about proportionality earlier. Backup and hot pursuit. This is a very important part of law enforcement. When you are in hot pursuit of suspects that have come into your property or have poached in your property, you have to understand that there's a standard operating procedure on hot pursuit, and you have to understand what your rights and limitations are. In general, we as South African citizens that aren't police officers or peace officers, we can't just go wherever we want to and go and arrest people, for crimes maybe at their homes, etc., etc. There are ways that you can do that through citizens' arrests and things like that, but it's a slippery slope. And at the end of the day, you could get yourself into some serious problems. So when you have a protected area one day, understand what your rights and limitations are. If you're an environmental management inspector, it does help a heck of a lot, and it does give you certain other rights as well. Your backup has to be effective, and it has to be informed. So in other words, it doesn't help that your backup is not aware of what is going on and is not aware that they are on backup in the first place. And remember, there'll always be a stick that are on backup to be able to go in hot pursuit and to be able to follow up on these kinds of incidences. Right, so now we've got a poaching incident. We know that it's happened in the park. How do we react to this? And how do we actually deal with this? So let's have a look here and see. All right, so we know what poaching is, guys. We don't have to get into too much detail about that. We know that poaching is the illegal harvesting of natural resources. This is often detrimental to those natural resources, and it's driven by things like money, poverty, need, and traditions. You know, we all understand what poaching is. We don't have to get into too much detail about that. Right, so poaching incidences on your protected area, there could be two different types. You know, so there could be a hot incident, and there could also be a cold incident. So at the end of the day, a hot incident is something that is unfolding at that moment in time. So in other words, it's busy happening now. A cold incident, on the other hand, is something that you might encounter whilst on patrol, or it might be encountered by anybody, even a game driver from a camp, etc., etc. They might come around a corner and there is a rhino carcass lying next to the road. The horns have been taken off and the perpetrators are no longer there and they're long gone. So it's something that has happened after the fact and this is discovered after a period of time. So you would understand that both these two types of incidences will have a different way of responding to them. Okay. So you will not be responding to a hot incident the same way that you'll be responding to a cold incident in a certain measure. So let's have a quick look at this then. Right, so when it comes to either one of those two incidences, hot or cold poaching incidences, there's going to be a crime scene. So you would understand if you had poaching in your reserve now, there's going to definitely be a crime scene. And that crime scene is going to have evidence, and it's going to give us some clues. All right, so this is the single most important part of any investigation of a crime, is to make sure that that crime scene is well preserved and that the evidence is collected in the right manner. Okay, so I say this again. This is the single most important part of any investigation. If you stuff this up, at the end of the day, it's going to be difficult to get back from there. Because consider this, if you look at that second bullet there, the crime scene may be the only place in the universe where you'll ever come into direct contact with somebody, with something that the suspect has touched. So at the end of the day, you probably will never again come into such close contact with the person that has shot and killed your beloved white rhino bull or something like that. So this is why crime scene investigation, CSI, and the management of that crime scene becomes so important. So I've seen in some of the previous presentations that you guys have gone into crime scene management quite well, and there's been a lot of detail given about that. So we won't get into too much of that. Of course, crime scene management is a course on its own that could last weeks for us to get into. But maybe what you should understand is that crime scene management depends on what your level is to do that. So at the end of the day, if you're not as a registered CSI, like I am, for instance, you will not be able to go onto a crime scene and to do too much on that crime scene. You will, though, as a management of a protected area, be able to preserve that scene, to cordon it off and to ensure that nobody gets onto it, so that when a CSI gets there, he'll be able to do his job properly. All right, so very important part of it. And also, just to go back maybe to a couple of crime scene investigation, guys, is not about CSI on the TV where you drive around with a V8 Ford Mustang and you've got designer clothes on. It's very often, as you can see on this slide here, standing knee deep into in stuff that has been dead and rotting for the last 2 weeks. So there's no glamour in it. It's definitely not like you would think of these on the TV. Okay, so just a last slide maybe before we wrap it up on resources. So at the end of the day, like I said, to crime scene management, extremely important part of it. Here is just my personal crime scene kit and the stuff that I have in my crime scene kit. You can see there's a whole lot of different types of things there. There's some flags for evidence. There's some rods for bullet holes and bullet tracks. There's some materials there that you can use to take footprints off the ground. There's obviously some books and pens. There's some soap to wash your hands after you've been in that knee-deep muck and mire, and there's some plastic bags for evidence. There's some danger tape, etc., dust masks, gloves. There's a metal detector up at the top there. So these are the kinds of things that you would need to make up a crime scene kit for yourself. There's got to be a checklist that attaches to that kit. In other words, that you know what is in there and what you need and what you need to replace when you've used it, etc., etc. And also tells you what you need to take when you go to a crime scene, because you don't want to walk for 10 kilometers to a crime scene through the bush of Africa and get to the other side there and realize that you didn't bring your camera, or you didn't bring a data card for your camera. So checklists, make checklists, a lot of them. A pocketbook. Remember, I spoke earlier about a pocketbook. It's the most effective recording tool that you have, because you can write everything inside there. Cameras for records, and then obviously your sketch maps, etc., for your crime scene. So guys, this is basically it from a point of view of how to patrol and observe your protected area. What do you do if you see an incursion, and how do you react into a poaching incident as it unfolds and happens on your protected area. So if there's any questions, obviously you guys are more than welcome to ask, and we'll see how we can answer them.
Cheryl, I see your video is on. Would you like to comment at this point, or
thank you. Yeah, thanks, Johan. Today is another thing that I learn every session. I helped with GDOD many years ago when my career started in 1986 at Suikerbosrand. And that's when I went out with all the crime investigation guys, but we did multi-plants and deforestation and the odd poaching crimes, but then we also went out further field, and then we set up roadblocks and stuff like that. But thanks, Frik. I just want to ask you, what do you do with hair lacquer in your crime scene? I see there's Wonder Set and there's baby powder, and it's all these little tricks, and I would like to know what you actually do with that stuff. Yeah.
So Cheryl, when I said that that it's not a job for the CSI guys on the TV, with the designer clothes and stuff, I forgot to mention that we do also have to look good when we're going to the field, so we do take a little bit of hairspray along. No, obviously not. That's not the reason. No, we use it to spray on the ground when we lift up the plaster of Paris. So it's easy that you don't get too much stuff stuck on the plaster of Paris when you do the footprint imprints with plaster of Paris. And also on the side of the actual, you would have seen on the back, the last slide, there was some stainless steel frames. So those frames obviously are sitting on the side of the footprint, and they are sprayed as well. So that it's just so that the plaster of Paris can get out quite easily. Oh,
okay. No, thank you. Now I've learned. I'm going to take hairspray with. Yeah. I've done Sounds of the World with kids
hairspray, you can't be without it.
Yeah, and I've done plaster of Paris spoor imprints with children out in the field, and now we've always battled to try and get it out. And yeah, thank you. That was just one of the questions. And then I see your hot poaching incident. There was a slide of deforestation or community collecting firewood. And many people just think poaching incidences are just to do with meat, but it's not. It's bigger than that.
Yeah. So absolutely. So at the end of the day, look, I mean, I can tell you now, most of the cases that me and my field rangers will deal with here in Weenen is actually theft cases. It's not killing of an animal or stealing of a cycad or something like that. It's actually things like firewood collection, things like fence thefts. Unfortunately, when guys come across my remote sensing cameras, they will steal those. So there's a whole myriad of different crimes that you'll deal with in a protected area. It's not only about meat and yes, poaching. Yes.
And many people think it is just about that, but it's not. It's actually it's bigger. It's a bigger picture. Thank you. Yeah. Hope my students have got a lot of questions to ask, Johan.
I see Nicolette is asking a very interesting question. Can you give an example of a pocketbook inscription, please?
Okay. All right. I can do that. If you give me a second, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just pull out of my drawer here. I wonder if you can see this. Okay, so just for the students so that they see, this is a pocket book. Okay, it's a tiny little book that you can put in your top pocket, obviously. The front of this book has got a place where you can put your name in, and it's got a serial number, etc., etc. And then the lines on the inside just look like this. So all of the pages have been numbered, if you can see in the top corner there, and it's just lines. Okay, so unfortunately, I can't give you any of my inscriptions because, obviously that's still all cases and things like that. But basically, guys, what happens is that this little book that you see here, a pocket book has got a very specific way of being used. So you will write at the top of the page the incident name and a date. and you will also then write the time. Every single time that you make an inscription here, you'll fill up every line from this side to the other side, all the way to the bottom. You'll never leave any spaces. If you have to leave a space behind a sentence, you will rule out that space, because remember when I said to you, this book you can take to court and any magistrate will actually accept this book as evidence. So you can use any kind of book. It doesn't have to be a fancy thing like this, as long as it's something that you can carry with you. But as long as you understand that that book has to be used in the proper manner, and you have to, obviously, you can only fill it in pen. You can't rub out. You can't use Tipex, nothing. If you make a mistake on it, you have to rule out that word or that sentence and rewrite that kind of thing. And then if you go to court, if you present this as evidence to court, what I normally do is I open up the pages that has to do with that case, and I then staple all the other pages shut so that nobody else can see what I've written inside there. A pocketbook may seem like an archaic and old-fashioned way of doing this, but let me tell you, even the New York Police Department still make use of pocketbooks today for everything that they do. It is still one of the most important law enforcement tools.
Yeah, it is important to note that you can actually take that pocketbook to court and that it is part of that process. So it's something to really pay attention to. I think some of
Absolutely.
the other presenters also noted the notebook, and that you must make notes, because you will arrive back at your base and you will want that information and you would have forgotten because it was a busy day. So write it down, then you don't forget.
But also another thing, Frik, I don't know whether you picked it up. I know we slipped up once when I was working for GDOT. Make copies of that book, because when you hand it over for evidence, sometimes that book disappears. And then you've got your backups.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a fact. You have to do that. You got to make copies. I can tell you one thing. If you're a ranger that's done the things that you have to do properly, you'll go on pension after a 30 or 40 year pension, 30 or 40 year career with a bag full of pocketbooks. And I will go to those things, to the grave with those things, because they're my record. So one day when I get buried, they will be buried with me. That's just the way that it works. The other thing I wanted to mention as well is a pocketbook is not for your shopping list. It's not for writing down your wife's birthday date and stuff like that, or whatever the case may be. You have to understand that this is a professional document, guys. So when you use a pocketbook, you only write details of the stuff in there. There's a lot of rangers that actually go as far as writing when they go onto duty at the time and stuff like that. Me, unfortunately, I'm not that pedantic, but there are guys that actually do that as well. And then when you go for training, for basic training as a ranger, they will teach you to do that kind of thing. But they're only trying to get you into the thing of actually using that pocketbook on a daily basis. So yeah, pocketbook, carry it in your pocket with a pen, and everything that happens, make notes of that. Remember, never use it, lose any or leave any lines open. And if you make a mistake, rule it out and write it underneath. Sign it at the end of each page so that you know that it's your handwriting there.
And Frik, cell phone videos and recordings, can you actually add that in your pocketbook to say that there was a recording or a this and this and this done on the cell phone, or photographs done, and everything's notified or put down in that book?
Yeah. Absolutely. So if you take photographs or something and you've got the photograph number, the ESC number or something like that, you make a note of that in your pocketbook at that incident. So the incident, the title will be at the top plus the date of that incident. And then at the time, 0731, you took photograph ESC 009 and 0010 and 0011, and you just make a note of that like that. No problem at all. At the end of the day, it's just a record so that you don't 2 years from now stand in front of the magistrate and the lawyer asks you a question that you can't understand. Because remember, you can also in court actually look back on this pocketbook. You can keep it with you in court, and you can say to the defense lawyer, sorry, sir, let me just look back and see exactly what happened on that day.
Including the video or recordings. How strong are video recordings in court? Are they quite strong?
So in the old days, it was quite difficult to actually get them admitted as evidence. There was a lot of the old magistrates that didn't want to deal with them, but today it's not a difficult thing. You have to just obviously get it into the SAP 13, get it admitted as evidence into that case, and then it can be easily used. There is a protocol though that has to be followed with these videos and photographs. So I'm not quite sure exactly how the tech around that works, but those photographs and videos have to be proven to be the actual evidence that was taken on the day. So it can't be something that you filmed off the internet or something like that on your TV screen, on your computer screen. So anything like that will never be admitted as evidence. But at the end of the day, if you can prove that this is a record of what happened on that day, and that is even maybe a timestamp on a photograph in a docket. So if you wanted to take a photograph of a skull of a rhino that has the bullet tracked rod through it, and you got that photograph time-stamped and printed in that manner, and in your docket, it's fine. It will, in general, will be accepted as evidential part of the case. I saw that there was a question from one of the participants wanting to know about the size of a stick, a patrol stick. So, okay, this is anybody's sort of preference, but it depends on a couple of things, guys. It'll depend on how many people you actually have, okay? But there's one golden rule about a stick. A stick of a patrolling stick should never, ever have less than 2 members, okay? One person cannot patrol on their own. This is very bad practice. 2 people is pushing the envelope, but at the end of the day, at least there's another person that can react if there's problems. But optimal is 3. More than 3 becomes cumbersome, except if you want to do a sweep or an extended line, and it depends on what you want to achieve on that patrol. If an extended line is to be done in order to find carcasses maybe, or sweep an area for, then it's going to be important for you to have as many people as possible on that line. But if you are going to just be clandestine patrolling for law enforcement, 2 to 3 people is the optimal stick.
All right. Christine, you've had your hand up. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Good morning. My name is Christine Wagner. I'm a second-year nature conservation student at TUT. You'll definitely receive my CV for next year. I just want to thank you for the time. This is definitely something I know a few students are interested in, and you summarized everything really clearly. And thank you for the work you do. We as young students we look up to you, and hopefully we can learn a lot from you one day. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine.
Well, thank you, Christine. Yeah, thank you so much, Christine. I do appreciate that, and I appreciate the kind words. And yeah, so look, I think maybe what you guys have all got to understand that in the mid-1990s, I was sitting exactly where you're sitting now. I was also a second-year student, and I was looking at the Natal Parks Board. Obviously, as a young boy, I wanted to work for the Natal Parks Board, and I was lucky enough to be able to get that right in my career. But yeah, maybe if I can use a minute or so just to tell you guys, go for it. I mean, you guys are in such an amazing position to be able to do a fantastic job and have an amazing career. I mean, I have been in conservation for nearly on 30 years now, 25 years or so. And I can tell you one thing, I haven't had one bad day. I've had plenty bad days. That's not true, but I haven't had one day that I've actually regretted doing what I do. And guys, I can tell you one thing now, we need youngsters, we need people that have heart, people that do this job because they have a passion for it. And it's the only thing that you can think of when you wake up in the morning and when you go to bed at night, is when you can be in the bush and work in this kind of environment. If you're that kind of person, we are desperate to get people like that into the conservation realm. I say this to the students that come to Weenen. I've got a little education camp here that I do some education work with the kids. I say to the students in school always, you must understand that you are inheriting a world completely different from what I inherited when I was your age. From here on in, if you don't make a difference, there is no second chances anymore. I mean, we could still duck and dive, but for you guys, this is it. So yeah, so Christine, thanks for the nice words, and I really hope that you guys, all of you, make it and you become great conservationists.
And it starts with you inside, Frik, as you said. If this is not what they want to do and they just studied it because there was a gap in our course, then I don't think you'll ever make it. But guys, you got to eat it, you got to breathe it, and you got to sleep it. And it's not a 9-to-5 job. You're going to work damn hard and you're going to make a difference. You're going to get these little fingers, not these long fingernails, these fingers really, really, really dirty. So girls, get rid of those fingernails, because you're going to get hands on and you're going to start digging in the sand and you're going to start doing things and you're going to become known out in the field. I'm very impressed with a lot of you in my class, and Frik, thank you.
So a follow-up question from Nicolette. If there is time, can you please indicate how you execute the snare patrol?
Okay, all right. So very often what will happen, Nicolette, is that that you will come across a snare line. Okay, so obviously there are areas in a protected area that you have a far better chance of actually encountering a snare line. So at the end of the day, near a fence line, near maybe a road or a through path in a reserve, you know, and on game trails is where you'll be looking for snares. So what we normally do is, if we're going specifically to look for snares, we'll do what's called an extended line. So it's another type of patrol that you can do. So in other words, what you do is you within shouting distance, although you don't shout whilst in patrol, but you're within shouting distance of your brother or sister next to you, and you move through the bush in an extended line, and making sure that the person on your left hand side or your right hand side, depending on which is your best, is in your view all the time. And then you move through the bush looking for stuff like that. So this is normally what we do to look for snares. So the big thing is, what do you do when you find a snare line? At the end of the day, you can lift those snares, because that's normally the first thing that we think of as conservationists. Lift them and get them out of the field, because, you know, they're going to be hurting something that we love. But at the end of the day, it's far more effective for you to actually leave that snare line as it is, withdraw, regroup, replan, and go in and set ambush at that snare line and wait for the people that have actually set those snares to come in to check them. Because then at the end of the day, you can get the guy that has set the snares and you can remove those snares as well. We very often find animals already dead and rotting in snare lines, and then you'll be going there because maybe if it's a large animal like a hippo or a rhino or something like that, you know, vultures will tell you that they're there. If smaller animals, you might find the smell or so. I don't know if that answers what you were thinking of.
Thank you, Frik. Nicolette, if you have any further questions, you are welcome to ask follow-up questions. I just want to comment that you mentioned that you are a registered CSI. So my question is, what is the process to get to that point, should the students want to follow?
Okay, so basically, on what I did is I did quite an intensive training course. That's really what it comes down to. So through some guys that are in the crime scene investigation realm, policemen, etc., we've done quite an intensive training course of about 2 weeks in the field and another month or so on the internet, and I basically just got registered like that. So there's a lot of people that do that course. I'm just trying to see. Ours was done by something called the Wildlife Crime Working Group. So in Natal, we have a group of people called the KwaZulu-Natal Wildlife Crime Working Group. This is made up of a lot of policemen and prosecutors, etc., and they presented our course for us. So at the end of the day, at that course, they'll basically teach you how to collect evidence, how to preserve evidence, how to preserve the chain of evidence, which is an incredibly important part of it. These guys have all watched CSI on the TV and things like that, and you know that if you break that evidential chain towards the conclusion of your case, your probability of getting that case prosecuted is actually diminishes quite a lot. How to preserve a crime scene, I think what the students need to understand and remember is that even if you don't do the training and you don't get the training, you can still teach yourself. And even by finding an old grizzled one like me and asking me for advice, you can teach yourself how to properly preserve that crime scene and making sure that nobody that shouldn't go on that crime scene goes onto that crime scene. And that really is the best that you can do for the CSI, is to ensure that that crime scene is exactly the way that the criminal left it when he gets onto that scene.
Yeah, I must say, well, the students, I hope you're noticing that a lot of the presenters have said the exact same thing. So that means it's important. I'm sensing an exam question there. Another question then to follow up on that. Do we have sufficient capacity in South Africa in terms of registered CSIs, or is there a need for more people to work in the field?
So there isn't enough capacity, Johan. Definitely not. The fact of the matter is that the police themselves have something called the LCRC, which is the Local Crime Record Center. And the Local Crime Record Center in each of the SAPS districts normally has the CSIs in them. Unfortunately, these guys are invariably very short from a staff point of view and very short from a resource point of view. And unfortunately, it has to be said, very short from a training point of view, especially as it relates to wildlife crimes. So you can understand if you go to a taxi rank where 5 people have been murdered, you will do some other things on that crime scene as what you will do on a rhino crime 10 kilometers away from the closest road. And very often for us that have to go to those crime scenes, it is a bit of a pain in the backside to get there, because you can't drive there. You got to carry those crime scene kits, and you got to carry your metal detectors plus your guns and everything to get to that scene in the first place. Might take you 2 hours of trekking through the bush, and this is not something that's very high, unfortunately, on the list of the SAPS members. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes. So certainly conservation-minded people that are good crime scene investigators and managers, those guys will definitely be needed, in many cases. If you can get yourself that kind of qualification, guys, and get into a reserve where they know you can deal with a crime scene, you'll be well away.
So students, if you notice that you perhaps have some extra time on your hand or time during the holidays, it's perhaps a short course to invest in and get that qualification under the belt. It will just put you in good stead to get your career going, it seems to me. And it was just a question that came up to me while you were describing your process. How is your relationship? I mean, Weenen is fairly remote. How is your relationship with the SAPS? At what stage do you call the police? And is the police an actual backup for you at any stage?
Yes. So here in this part of the world, I'm happy to say that I have a very strong relationship with my local SAPS station. Captain Biela is my local SAPS commander. I've worked with Captain Biela for the last 9 years, very closely. I get very good support from him and from the station itself. Obviously, Weenen is a small station in a very volatile district. So you can understand that Captain Biela has got some really large problems to deal with. There's a lot of faction fighting down here. There's a lot of political instability. There's a lot of taxi violence, unfortunately. So it's quite an unstable area. So even with all that stuff, I'm actually getting good support from him. Now, the reason for this, and this is something else that these students can take along with them. You've got to understand that when you get into a reserve, as the manager of that reserve, you have to realize and understand who are your stakeholders. You got to engage with those stakeholders. You got to identify the right ones, and you got to build a relationship with them. Okay, guys, there's no two ways about this. You cannot get away from it. You cannot be seen to sit in your station, in your reserve, and criticize your police station and think they're going to help you with anything. It doesn't work that way. You have to build those relationships. I have a good relationship with Captain Biela because I know him, he knows me, we trust each other, and we have a strong relationship. And the only way you get that right is by building it. Now, I had a guy that trained me years and years ago on this exact same thing, and he used to say, the key to that is braai. Braai, braai, braai. So which means whenever you have an opportunity, invite your local SAPS and have a braai, because there around the braai in the bush, everything gets sold.
Excellent. That's a wonderful tip. These are really pro tips that you give away, from baby powder to the bride. That's very South African. You're not going to learn this anywhere else. Thank you very much.
So now listen, maybe just as a bit of a you know, as a final sort of word to the guys, just to say that you know, to everybody, good luck to the exams that are coming at the end of the year. You know, I remember that the second year end exams was quite a hectic one. I'm just trying to remember what was. Yeah, that was definitely Plants 3 that gave me the most nightmares. Dr. Eberson, I don't know where in the world she is, but yeah. So I didn't sleep a lot in those final sort of months. But anyway, guys, good luck, and I hope that all of you make it, and that all of you you know, get into the swing of things next year and get a job somewhere. And just hang in there, because at the end of the day, we're also working hard on KZN Wildlife side, Cheryl, to try to get back into getting guys from your side into the organization. Like I said in the beginning, we need youngsters that can actually start coming into the system, you know, that can work with us, so that whenever I go on pension one day, that I can hand these places over to you know, to people that can take them over. So yeah, so just good luck to all the guys, to all the kids, and I hope you guys make it, and that you enjoy the rest of the year.
Thank you, everybody, and good luck to the students. We're going to give you a 2-week break now to handle the exams. We know it's going to go well because you're working hard. Look forward to welcome you back towards the end of September. Thank you very much, Frik. We really, really appreciate the session this morning.